What's up guys, HellaBass back with another video. We're going to continue our rod and reel arsenal series. We've got 3 more piles of rods to go through. I told you this was going to be a 3-part series. It's going to be a 4-part series. I have a serious rod problem. I have a ton of rods. I want to make sure these videos are in bite-sized, manageable chunks for you to digest. As we get into this content, make sure you follow along, you subscribe, hit that bell notification so you don't miss any videos. And as always, you can follow me along at HellaBass on like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, any of those social medias. There's links in the description, or just search HellaBass and you'll be sure to find me. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate every one of you that watches, thinking about hitting that like button and subscribe to this video if you find the content rewarding. But now let's dig into those rods. This series is going to be about my reaction series based rods that I use fluoro and monofilament on. To see the rest of the videos, see the links in the descriptions in the comments below or in the cards up here. I'll make sure to have all those links readily available. There'll be a series playlist, so if you want to dig in and watch all these as they come out, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss one of these videos. All right, as stated before, I'm going to take you through my reaction bait rods. Most of these are spooled with either fluoro or monofilament lines. We're going to start with kind of our shorter rods and go into our longer, heavier power rods and talk about how each one of those are a tool that I use when fishing for bass. So this rod is one of my smaller rods. It doesn't get a ton of use for me. It's kind of a specialty rod in my opinion for what I use it for. It's a Dobyns Champion 684 CB for crankbait. So 6'8", 4 power. And I got this paired with a 6-4-1 Credo 50E. So it's a small reel to match kind of a smaller rod. It does really well throwing lighter baits on lighter line. I typically have 10-pound fluorocarbon on this rod and reel setup. And what I use it for is my lighter Kitex, some of my bigger spy baits. But what I really like it for is like small flat-sided crankbaits like a Rapala Shad Rap. So a lot of times this is kind of my cold water, clear water, springtime, cranking, small swim baits, and that's what I typically use this rod for. So a lot of things you could do on a spinning rod, but I like to use a baitcaster, just more comfortable with that. Next up is a Dobyns Sierra Series 703 casting rod. This rod really is a great all-around rod. I tend to use this one for reaction baits, such as like spinner baits, smaller crankbaits, things like that. It's kind of a utility rod. Sometimes I will use this for like a Senko or a light Texas rig or things like that as well. So it is really an all-around purpose rod, 7 foot, 3 power. It's got enough backbone that you can fish a spinner bait or set the hook with a Texas rig or fish a real small finesse jig. All around great rod. It tends to do a little more reaction baits for me, but this rod definitely has a ton of capability. This one is spooled up with a Credo 200 G7, which is a 7-to-1 reel. I like that take up, so I have more versatility. I can slow down when I'm fishing reaction baits, but if I am fishing a worm or something like that, I've got the speed for taking up the line. Next up, I've got 2 identical rods, which are Champion 704 CB for crankbait rods. So 7 foot, 4 power crankbait rods. These are graphite crankbait rods, not glass rods. I like that because I really like to feel what the crankbait's doing. I'm not a big fan of glass rods. Some people are. Dobyns makes great glass rods for those people that like that style of rod. I like a little bit faster action still, you know, that parabolic bend that the crankbait rod gives you. But I like to be able to feel when I'm hung in grass, especially where I fish. There's a lot of grass, there's a lot of vegetation, so I want to be able to feel when I got a little bit and I can snap it free. So I tend to fish a lot of jerk baits on these rods. I like these for jerkbaits 704. I also fish smaller crankbaits like a DT6, a DT4, small lipless crankbaits, things like that. I will occasionally throw some swim baits on there with like a 3/8 or smaller type head, so my smaller boot tail swim baits. Both these reels here, this one is my 50E also 6-4-1. This one really does a great job throwing light baits like jerk baits. And then this older style Bantam Super Free 200 is a little bit better when I'm throwing rattle traps and bigger baits and swim baits like this. So all around, these are my utility workhorse, moderate to mid-size baits for reaction baits. So these 2 704 rods typically almost always have 10-pound fluoro on these. It typically does everything I need to do cranking and small swim baits. Every once in a while I'll bump up to 12-pound if I'm fishing shallow or heavier cover or bigger baits or bigger fish and I not sacrificing on that line depth. All right, stepping up a little bit, another 7-foot rod. This is the 705 CB crankbait rod. Same thing, I'm using the graphite version. I like this for square bills mostly, a little bit bigger crankbaits. A little bit bigger lipless crankbaits. I've got this on a 5 to 1 gear ratio, which, so this probably I'm going to end up switching out and going to maybe a 6, so I can do a little more things. This gets to be a little slow for like lipless crankbaits and things like that, but does all right for like square bills and some of those more moderate sized crankbaits and DT10s. But I would say day in and day out, square bills mostly on this 705. On my 705, this typically has 12 to 15 pound fluoro, depending on what level of cranking I'm doing. So if I'm throwing like a DT10 or something like that, I'm probably going to throw it more on like 10 to 12 pound line. If I'm, square billing and things like that, probably more 15 pound fluorocarbon. So here is the Dobyns 765 crankbait. So same action as the previous rod, but a 7.6. So this is a much longer rod, so I can really launch those bigger plugs. So I've got a mag wiggle wart on here. I'll throw like deep diving DT16s, fat-free shads, some of the bigger Strike King crankbaits. Throw this on typically 10 to 12 pound fluoro. I've got an old Crown Arc D 5 for doing that deep cranking. This kind of, I don't do a ton of this. I know there's more of a trend to go to higher speed reels like this, so that is something I may look to in the future. But I don't do a ton of this, but I have this rod for when I need to do that deep cranking. All right, this is the last one in this series. This is a big dog. This is this Dobyns 795 SB swim bait rod. So this is 7 foot 9 inches, 5 power, big parallelic bend, nice tip, nice backbone for throwing big baits. This is not a real big bait, but this is like a 6-inch Dream Smasher that's got a fair amount of bulk and weight to it. I throw that on an older 300 Credo E, which is a pretty nice reel. There's a lot of great swim bait reels. This is just the one that I happen to get. I don't do a ton of swim baiting, but when I do, this rod with a long butt handle will really do all that stuff. So if I'm throwing like HUDs or big baits like that, or some of the glide baits and things like that, this is the rod that does all that work for me. I do know there's a lot of people that love this in the Fury series. There's a 795 swim bait rod in the Fury series that I've not tried myself, but if you're looking for a bargain swim bait rod, people tend to rave about what that rod can do at that $110-ish price point. So there we go. That's my reaction series rods. Kind of a small group for me and what I fish fluorocarbon. Make sure you tune in the next video where we're going to dive into my braided rods. There's going to be a lot of punching, flipping, frogging, reaction style baits like that. And you won't want to miss that. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you can get all these videos and notifications. Let me know what you want to see. If you got any questions about these rods, leave a comment down below. Until next time, help you catch more bass and suck less.